Okay, I just have to make a quick public service announcement at the beginning of this video. I was intending to only film Mr. Mime when I sat down for this video, and then throughout the course of the day, a lot of things happened, and this is the video that we ended up with. So yes, Mewtwo is in this video, but unlike most of my Versus videos, we're going to go through this one chronologically so that I have a chance to outline my thinking process as it happened during the day. Okay, so let's start off with what was intended to be a Mr. Mime solo video. I'm soloing the main series Pokemon games with every species, and about a month ago I played Crystal version with Mr. Mime. Generation 2 ends up playing very similarly with most Pokemon. Return, Sleep Talk, Rest, and Curse are all very good in the game. Also, Pokemon tend to not have very good move pools, so strategies tend to centralize around these moves. That said, Mr. Mime was really unique and interesting. So much so that I was curious to see how it might do in Generation 3. After all, throughout this year I've been finding that Substitute is one of the best moves in this generation. So today I'm going to play Fire Red with only a Mr. Mime. Well, in this case, Miss Mime, because Mime is female. Miss Mime starts with Barrier and Confusion, a pretty good set. It's much better than in Generation 2, where you have to use Struggle to get to level 6 where it can learn Confusion. Also, I do want to mention the fact that between Emerald version and Fire Red, Mr. Mime's moveset was updated. Now it learns things at slightly lower levels, which is helpful in the early game. Although I don't think I'm going to need Substitute for Brock. Barrier increases my defense stat by 2 stages, and this is going to be more than enough to defeat him. So much so that I think Mr. Mime might be able to beat him on minimum battles. That means only the one mandatory bug catcher in the forest, so after quickly collecting my HM users, a Pidgey and a Rattata on Route 1, I head through the forest, defeat the mandatory bug catcher's Weedle with a single Confusion, and then I head into Pewter City. In most of my Fire Red playthroughs, I'm not fighting Brock on minimum battles, because I'm starting with first stage Pokemon, but since Mr. Mime is a single stage Pokemon, it starts with its full stats, and I figured I could just go up against Brock right away. While I heal and head over to the gym, let's first talk about Mr. Mime's base stats because they are quite good. It has 40 HP, 45 attack, and 65 defense. These are not great, but its 90 speed, 100 special attack, and 120 special defense are excellent. Plus, if I really want to, I can always set up my attack with Meditate starting at level 12, and I'm gonna have Barrier for my defense as I mentioned before. And that should be enough for Brock, so let's see how the first gym leader goes. His first Pokemon is Geodude, and I'm going to take this opportunity to set up Barrier to +6. I want to do this so that Tackle is dealing the least amount of damage. I know that the Geodude is going to be roughly a 3-shot, maybe a 4-shot if I've really underestimated Mr. Mime's damage. I was correct, the Geodude takes 3 hits to knock out, and the experience from it levels me up from level 6 all the way to level 8, because Mr. Mime has a medium fast growth rate, which is decent in the early game. At level 8, Mr. Mime gets access to Substitute, and I set it up right away so that Rock Tomb can't lower my speed. It's also going to help me out just in case the Onix gets any critical hits. Onix goes for Tackle, my Substitute survives because it takes my defense stat, which is 68 right now, and Onix isn't even able to break my defenses, and I take it out, earning myself the first badge. Okay, so brief story time. I do want to come clean here. This is technically my second attempt with Mr. Mime. I did an earlier attempt where I had got all the way to Brock on minimum battles. I decided not to save before him because I figured Mr. Mime would have absolutely no problems. This ended up being a mistake because the Onix crit 2 times in a row. I decided to restart because in all of my challenges, I allow myself to just simply start it over again if the first gym leader is too much of a problem. This is a rule generally across the board, even in first runs, although I tend to not like to do that. I'm not like optimizing for Brock. I just thought this luck was so ridiculous and my strategy is exactly the same. Mr. Mime is honestly fantastic in the early game and it shouldn't be having problems here, so unless the AI gets really lucky, it just sweeps through all the early game Pokemon, especially the people on Route 3. I do get caught by one non-mandatory trainer who walks up and down in a random pattern. This is a little unfortunate because it stops my minimum battle streak. That's okay though, because her Jigglypuff isn't nearly as scary as it is in yellow version. Okay, Mount Moon's next. I'm not going to fight any optional trainers here, but I am going to go down this one ladder and pick up an Ether as well as the TM for Thief, which I'll teach right away to Mr. Mime in the place place of meditate. I am not going to need to set up my attack stat. My strategy is to play a purely special Mr. Mime in this case. There are 2 mandatory trainers at the end of the cave, but they have lots of poison types, and of course confusion is great against them, so Mr. Mime has made it to Cerulean City. Here I have my first fork in the road. I have to choose between Misty or the rival on Nugget Bridge. I felt like the rival's team of 4 Pokemon would be a little bit too difficult, and with Mr. Mime's high special defense, I thought that Misty would be possible. So after battling one optional trainer in her gym just for a little bit more experience, I go up against the second gym leader. Her first Pokemon is Staryu. It has 38 speed, moves first, crits with Water Pulse, and does more than half to Mr. Mime before I set up Substitute. This is not looking good. Then Water Pulse breaks my defenses, and Confusion does less damage than I was expecting. Okay, so we objectively know now that Misty was not the correct choice. Instead, I pick up the rare candy. I actually backtrack here and fight the one swimmer in the gym just to level up one more time before facing the rival. Now, he leads with a Pidgeotto, but it has Sand Attack and it loves to use this move. I figured I could set up with Substitute, block the status move, and then establish my defenses with Barrier. However, it does start breaking my substitutes, and I didn't set up multiple barriers, which ends up being a mistake because Rattata comes in and it gets lucky with a critical hit, finishing Mr. Mime. That's my second reset. I figured this might be possible. Maybe the Pidgeotto will just spam Sand Attack, but it isn't doing this in the next battle, instead prioritizing attacking moves, in this case Quick Attack, which is doing a lot of damage, breaks my substitute twice. By the time I go up against the Rattata, I'm on low health. I do manage to finish it off this time, but Charmander has special damage in the form of Ember, so Mr. Mime takes a third reset. Okay, everything up until Cerulean City was quite simple, but now I've got myself into a bit of a tricky situation. I can't backtrack into Mount Moon to fight a bunch of optional trainers to gain experience quickly. I would have to grind on wild Pokemon now if I want to fight trainers. I guess I could deposit my HM users and then feint against the rivals, say Rattata or Charmander, gaining a little bit of trainer boosted experience each battle, but I didn't think that I would need that. Eventually I'm going to be able to pull through. After one more quick reset due to a mistake, I come back into the battle with a new strategy. This time against the Pidgeotto, I'm just going to set up fully with Barrier. If it knocks out my substitute, then the next one will be more resilient, giving me more time. By doing this, I am able to take a victory, and while we watch that play out, I just want to mention the rival's team. In this case, he has Charmander, and this is honestly a mistake. I was trying to make it so that he would have the Blastoise team, but I ended up taking the wrong starter at the beginning of the game, so he's got Charmander. Either way, I think the Charizard team and the Blastoise team are very similar when you're playing with a Mr. Mime. Eventually, Mr. Mime is going to have an electric type move, which will be super effective against both Charizard and Blastoise. I consider the other Pokemon on his team. Obviously, the Venusaur team is the weakest because he has Gyarados, which is weak to Thunderbolt, and Venusaur, which is weak to Stab Psychic. The Arcanine would take neutral damage. The Charizard team is a little bit weaker than the Blastoise team theoretically because Charizard and Gyarados both take super effective damage, but Charizard is faster and it has higher physical attack, two things that I think make it a threat against Mr. Mime. While Blastoise does have Bite, it's special in Generation 3, which doesn't do very well against Mr. Mime's special defense, and the Turtle is obviously slower than the Flaming Lizard. I think I could make an argument either way that one of these teams is going to be the most difficult to go up against. I'm going to stop splitting hairs over this and we'll just play out the rest of the run against the Charizard team. On Nugget Bridge, Mr. Mime steamrolls the trainer's Pokemon. While it's doing this, it levels up to 19, where it has a chance to learn both Light Screen and Reflect. I think the first of these moves will be really useful against Misty, so I'm going to teach it in the place of Barrier. Keeping Substitute and Thief, of course, those will also be useful against her. With the Ether that I collected in Mount Moon, I'm able to restore Confusion's PP and not have to backtrack to the Pokemon Center, saving more time. And then, unlike most Pokemon in Generation 3, I do not pick up Secret Power, instead fighting minimum battles all the way until Bill's house. As I was heading back to Cerulean City, I noticed my experience and decided to fight the Rocket Trainer outside of the city just so that I could get a little bit more experience before Misty, because when I level up to 22, I'm going to gain access to Magical Leaf. Turn 1 against her Staryu, I go for Light Screen, then Substitute. After that, I can use Confusion to knock it out. This gives me enough experience to learn Magical Leaf in the place of Light Screen while I still have my defenses set up. This means Starmie has to go for Swift first turn. This breaks my substitute, but Magical Leaf does more than half, and while the Starfish hits with Water Pulse, it doesn't do very much, and Misty is defeated. Heading south to Vermilion City, I make a small mistake. This trainer here is optional. She isn't in Generation 1, but in Generation 3 you can squeeze by her on the left-hand side of the path. You're going to notice in a lot of my future challenges that I have not yet implemented this small change, because I have finished the playthroughs for all of the other runs up until the end of December. In my plan for Fire Red, I didn't have a Psychic type this year, so spontaneously, when I just wanted to do a fun video, I decided to put Mr. Mime in because, yeah, this thing's awesome. Also, this art by Brian is absolutely incredible. If you want to get something commissioned, check him out. I have a link in the description. Okay, so time for the SSN. Here, I'm going to grab the TM for Rest, just in case I need it later on. That's probably not going to be relevant, right? Mr. Mime is fantastic. After that, I pick up the berries in the kitchen and then go up against the rival. He is much easier this time. I'm a higher level, his Pokemon are kind of under-leveled by this point, and Mr. Mime just sweeps through his team with ease. The SSN departs, I head into Surge's gym, and now it's time for the third gym leader, who is one of the worst trainers in the game. Voltorb's first, it doesn't go down to a single confusion, gets some damage off before I take it out, and then on Pikachu I just set up Substitute, block its Thunder Wave, and one-shot with confusion. Okay, check this out. Surge, the incredible lieutenant who was in a war with his Pokemon, just uses Thunder Wave twice with Raichu and I knock it out for free, earning myself the third badge. Alright, with a little bit of a speed bump in Cerulean City, Mr. Mime is doing about how I expected. Now, we've done things a little bit out of order for this video. I need to go through its move pool, so let's take the time between here and Celadon City to do that. Through level up, Mr. Mime learns Encore, Psybeam, Recycle, Trick, Roleplay, Psychic Baton Pass, and Safeguard. Honestly, mostly defensive moves, and they're not really going to be that useful. Also, I do get Psybeam later on, but it comes too late in the playthrough to really have a major impact, because once I reach Celadon City, I'm going to get the TM for Psychic. Outside of this same type attack bonus move, Mr. Mime has so much diverse coverage. Focus Punch, Sunny Day, Solar Beam, Thunderbolt, Thunder, Shadow Ball, Brick Break, which I skipped by the way, although I can buy another one in Celadon City if I really want it, but I don't, it's physical. Shockwave, which I'm actually going to use to replace Thief right now so that I have super effective damage against the Slowpoke. Well, I guess Magical Leaf is also super effective, and I have two moves that bypass accuracy checks, so Mr. Mime does not need to worry about missing. Okay, all of that said, I haven't mentioned the most important move that Mr. Mime learns, and that's Calm Mind. I get access to this TM after I defeat Sabrina, so I want to make sure that I can do that as fast as is possible. And I constructed a strategy for my mid-game around obtaining this move. After arriving in Celadon City, I immediately grab the T and head to Saffron City to pick up the TM for Psychic, which I teach to Mr. Mime right away in the place of Psybeam, which really was only on my set for a couple battles. I can grab two PP ups, one here in Celadon City and the other one in the Rocket Hideout before I take on Giovanni. His team is so simple with my current set, so no point wasting time with narration here. After that, I pick up the coin case so that later on I can buy Thunderbolt, which will be a good replacement for Shockwave. Then in Erica's gym, I fight the minimum number of trainers, which I believe is 2 in Fire Red. In Yellow version, it's just 1. Although in this case, I'm not fighting minimum Pokemon. I could have fought the person with Execute, but none of my moves are good against Grass Psychic types. So instead, I go through the Central Tree and fight Mary, who has a team of 5 Pokemon, which give good experience yields, helping to level Mr. Mime up. With her defeated, it is time to face Erica. This battle is incredibly simple. Set up Substitute, block Stun Spore, one-shot the Victory Bell with Psychic, move on to the Tangela, which is low-leveled, so it goes down to a single hit. I level up to 34, and then finish off the Vileplume in a single hit. Erica was a clean sweep. I don't have a choice where to go next. I have to fight the rival in Pokemon Tower. In this battle, I want to focus on type effectiveness and the power of Psychic. Right now against neutral targets, it has an effective power of 135. This means when either Magical Leaf or Shockwave is super effective, like against the Pidgeotto, Psychic is still dealing more damage. There are only 2 scenarios where my coverage moves will deal more damage than Psychic. One of them is here against the Gyarados, where Shockwave has 4 times damage, allowing it to easily one-shot, and then the other scenario would be where Magical Leaf and Shockwave are dealing neutral damage, but Psychic is doubly resisted. However, that's not the case against the Execute though, because Psychic is only resisted a single time by the Execute's Psychic type. As a result, it has 67 effective power, so even neutrally effective Magical Leaf and Shockwave would deal less damage, but in this case they are also resisted, so Psychic is still just the right choice. Things get really hilarious to me against the Kadabra because Psychic does more damage than Magical Leaf and Shockwave, which feels really wrong. Either way, the rival is easy. Now we've examined the type effectiveness of my moveset, let's continue with the playthrough. I crush all the rockets at the top of the tower. This brings Mr. Mime close to level 37, and then on Cycling Road I fight one optional trainer, Biker William, with 5 Pokemon, and he brings me up to almost level 38. I rush my way through the Safari Zone, fly back to Fuchsia City, and head into Koga's gym. Koga should not be a threat. In Fire Red, he's quite bad. He's similar to his Red and Blue incarnation, except his wheezing can't detonate itself, making him overall less scary. Although I was a little bit worried about Juggler Kirk, who is the one mandatory trainer in the gym. His Psychic types take a long time for Mr. Mime to knock out, and the first Drowsy sets up decently well with Meditate, so its headbutts are actually a little bit scary. That said, the fight's just kind of long because Psychic doesn't do very much to Psychic types. With him out of the way, it is time to take on Koga. Alright, so I was so confident going into this fight I did not equip a Pecha Berry, which might be a problem because I use Substitute and the first coughing uses self-destruct, breaking my defense right away before the muck comes in. Now I set up again, but this gives it time to set up Minimize, so then I start missing, Sludge hits, breaks my Substitute, and Mr. Mime gets taken down to 3 hit points. Luckily, Psychic comes through for me and knocks the muck out. Alright, I'm in a really bad situation. I need to one-shot his following 2 Pokemon. Of course, the coughing isn't going to be an issue, but I think the wheezing might be able to survive. So let's see if Psychic has enough damage, and the answer is yes, it does. With that, I defeat Koga. That was an incredibly close battle, which probably shouldn't have been that way. Next, I'm going to go to Sylph because I want to keep my mid-game centralized here. After I finish this area off, I'm going to go directly to Sabrina and then never have to return to this city in the playthrough. On the 10th floor, I defeat the guy with Machoke and pick up a rare candy. Now I have a total of 8 in my bag, which is going to be relevant very soon. I grab myself another PP up on this little bush, and then I defeat the guy with Arbok. This just barely doesn't level Mr. Mime up to 40, so I fight one more trainer, use the healing room, and then I use all 8 rare candies, boosting Mr. Mime from 40 up to 48. Now, while I do this, I want to mention that this is a bold choice. Typically in Fire Red, I save my rare candies until just before Lorelei to ensure that my level is high enough to defeat the League without too many problems. So I think I can front load the rare candies here, making Rival 5 possible now with minimal training. I'm really hoping that this doesn't come back to bite me later on. Okay, Rival 5 is the last time that I will not have Calm Mind on my set against him. So it's very similar to the battle that happened in Pokemon Tower. After setting up Substitute, I can knock out the Pidgeot with Psychic and move on to the Gyarados, which I actually fail to see. I was thinking Execute was coming in next, so I miss Shockwave and instead use Psychic. This means it breaks my Substitute before the Charizard comes in, which is really not great. Then the Fire type uses Flamethrower, taking me to under half health, triggering Mr. Mime's Citrus Berry. But I have enough damage to 2-shot, so I move on to the final 2 Psychic Pokemon. And yeah, the Execute's not very good, it just misses Stun Spore. And the Alakazam is also trash because it only has Future Sight. Yes, that is its only damage dealing move, and as a result I defeat the rival even with my mistake against Gyarados. Making a quick callback to the discussion I had with the rival's team, I think this is as close as I could have made things to if the rival chose Blastoise. So yeah, I think Mr. Mime would be fine against either of the teams. It's also fine against Giovanni, his team is pathetic, and with that, I am now ready to head into Sabrina's gym to get the Calm Mind TM. But before her, I quickly fight one Psychic to gain enough experience to level up to 50 so that I'm over a damage rounding threshold. After all, most of her Pokemon are going to resist Psychic. Kadabra's first, I set up with Substitute because what's the chance that it's going to break my defenses, and then it starts setting up with its own Calm Minds. That said, I drop its special defense, but this still wouldn't be enough to get the 2-shot. However, Mr. Mime gets a critical hit, so it doesn't matter. Next she sends in Venomoth, the dark type of course. Psychic just one-shots, and with that I move on to Mr. Mime. Actually, that's wrong, it's also a Miss Mime. In this case, it doesn't really matter what move I use, it's going to take a while to knock out because she loves using hyper potions, healing it. Eventually I take it down and move on to her ace. This is where things become very unfortunate. While I have a substitute in place, and I do resist her attacks, her Alakazam has Calm Mind, which I don't have access to yet. It can set up its special defense, taking less and less damage from my attacks, and remember, Psychic is the correct choice here. I also have a chance of lowering special defense, and I was really hoping for this, but I don't, and as a result, Mr. Mime takes its 5th reset. I came back into the battle to try again, hoping for a special defense drop, and maybe the Alakazam won't set up so many Calm Minds. I get really lucky here. Turn 1 special defense drop, Alakazam does not set up with Calm Mind, and Mr. Mime 2-shots. With Sabrina defeated, I have earned myself the Calm Mind TM. This is perhaps the best move in the entire game in Fire Red. It might only be superseded by Bulk Up, which comes a little bit earlier in the run, and in Generation 3, fighting types are actually really good. It's very interesting that the Psychic type was great in Generation 1, and the fighting type was absolute trash, but in the remakes, it seems like these two typings might be vying for supremacy. Right now, Mewtwo has the best time in the tier list, but I'm thinking Mr. Mime might actually be able to contend with it, even in this run, after the bumps in Cerulean City. I teach Calm Mind in the place of Shockwave, keeping Magical Leaf for the Rhyhorns in Giovanni's gym, and then I sail south to Cinnabar Island. On my way I fight one trainer and then head into the mansion. Here I pick up some extra items just so I can sell them later on to get access to the Thunderbolt TM. 80,000 Pokédollars is a lot to collect, especially when you have to buy repels. Okay, we're not even going to do an intro for Blaine. Mr. Mime just doesn't really struggle against him. I think the only way that I would lose here is if Fire Blast gets a burn. The fact that I'm setting up with Calm Mind just means his attacks do so little to me, plus Psychic is neutral, so once I have +3, I just one-shot all of his Pokemon. Okay, Giovanni's gym is next. Normally Cool Trainer Warren is a little bit intimidating, but my type coverage is perfect against him, so let's take on Giovanni next. His team is pathetic in Fire Red. I don't really know what to say about him. Like, just with one Calm Mind, I am able to one-shot everything. Yeah, he is completely irrelevant. I backtrack to Celadon City, purchase the coins required to buy the TM for Thunderbolt, but I'm gonna hold off on teaching this. It might be useful against the rival on Route 22, but I think I can still pull through with Magical Leaf. That said, I now have Calm Mind, so this fight functions fundamentally different from the prior one, because after the Rhyhorn goes down, the rival sends in his Execute, and it is useless against me, trying to spam status moves while I set up for free with Calm Mind. Because of this, Mr. Mime has so much special attack that it sweeps his final 3 Pokemon, and with that, I've made it to Victory Road. There's one last rare candy to pick up in here. I'm only going to have 3 before the league, and then just before making it out of the cave, I accidentally make a pathing mistake and run into an optional trainer, which was kind of terrifying because I have low health. I didn't want to chance things against the Parasect. I wasn't sure if Psychic was going to one-hit, so I set up with Substitute, going down to 2 hit points, use 1 Calm Mind, and then sweep through her team, luckily knocking them all out in 1 hit. This does conveniently bring me up to level 56, so that when I use 3 candies, I go up to level 59 before Lorelei. As you can see, I've now taught Mr. Mime Thunderbolt. I think that this is going to be my final set for the run. Lorelei's Dugong is kind of useless. While it does attack with Ice Beam once, I get set up to +3, and then it breaks my Substitute and I use Thunderbolt to knock it out. I think I made a mistake here, not resetting my Substitute, but I wasn't aware of it in the moment. I figured that Thunderbolt would have enough damage to sweep through her Pokemon. After all, it is super effective against the Lapras, the Cloyster, and the Slowbro, but it's not super effective against the Jinx. I thought that neutral damage would be enough, but I was wrong. As a result, the Psychic type is able to put me to sleep with Lovely Kiss. That said, its Ice Punches aren't doing very much because my special defense is high, so once I wake up, I'm able to finish it off after a couple full restores. By using Substitute, I would have blocked Lovely Kiss and this would have been free, plus it would have been faster. I would have noticed my damage range, set up one more time with Calm Mind, and then one-shot. Surprisingly, the next fight actually requires a tiny bit of thinking, like the smallest amount. I needed to make a couple of choices. Do I use Substitute? Do I use Calm Mind? And in the end, I decided on Calm Mind without Substitute. This lets my speed get lowered, meaning only the Hitmonlee is faster than Mr. Mime. Yes, Bruno's Pokemon are quite slow. In this case though, the Hitmonlee doesn't even do enough damage, and the Machamp is a one-hit with my boosted special. Okay, Agatha, the first Gengar loves its status moves, and it has Shadow Punch, which is super effective, but it's physical, and Gengar's physical attack is not very good. In this case, though, it doesn't even try attacking. I just set up twice with Calm Mind and then one shot with Psychic. From there, her entire team is a series of 4 more one-hits, and I think that Mr. Mime is about to clock in with a sub-hour time. It actually might be able to beat Mewtwo's time of 57 minutes and 27 seconds if it's able to quickly make it through Lance and the champion. But things are getting really close. There needs to be no flaws. Either way, I think it's on time to get the second sub-hour time. So how is Lance going to be? Well, he leads with Gyarados, and Thunderbolt's just going to one-shot, but I wanted to set up here first to ensure that I would have good damage against the Dragonite. Mr. Mime has a problem though. Gyarados' Dragon Rages are able to break its substitute in a single hit. However, its bites are not. This does give me some play to set up with Calm Mind, however I'm not sure how the AI is choosing between these two moves. It kind of feels like it's a 50-50 chance at this point. Sometimes it'll break my substitute, sometimes it just won't do anything. That said, when my health is low enough, it will choose Hyper Beam because it can see that it gets the one hit. In an instance like this, I know that he has to recharge, so I can set up Calm Mind one more time before using Thunderbolt to knock out his lead. Then he sends in Aerodactyl, and I did not realize that this Pokemon is faster than Mr. Mime by 13 speed. It moves first with Hyper Beam, and Mr. Mime survives on 1 hit point. Okay, what is the chance that I one-shot the Dragonite? There is no chance. Dragonite easily survives and Mr. Mime faints. I think my dreams for its first playthrough beating Mewtwo's first playthrough are just gone now. And the situation against Lance gets progressively worse. I tried Calm Mind only, not setting up with Substitute, because that just wastes health if it chooses Dragon Rage. But there's a problem here. After it does about 2 turns of damage, it chooses Hyper Beam and then knocks Mr. Mime out without me being able to get past +2 setup. I am going to need at least +3 to one-shot the Dragonite, maybe even +4. And I also need enough health or a substitute in place to survive the attack from Aerodactyl. As you can see, when I get to +3, if I don't have a substitute in place, then the prehistoric Pokemon just knocks Mr. Mime out. Okay, what if I don't set up at all? Then I can knock the Gyarados out in 1 turn, and I was hoping for the same on the Aerodactyl, but it is able to survive my attacks. As a result, it will attack twice before I knock it out, and that leaves Mr. Mime on red health for the Dragonite, which is obviously not a good situation, even though I have a Citrus Berry. Also, Psychic does pathetic damage, and Wing Attack does so much. So that is another reset. Things are getting bad here. I think Mr. Mime might not actually get a sub-hour first playthrough, and I didn't think that that was possible with how well the run was going up until this point. Lance is honestly just really awful. My soundproof ability doesn't help me out at all in this fight. I can't really set up consistently in any way using Calm Mind and Substitute together. So, remember back to the SSN when I picked up Rest? After many more resets to Lance, I finally figured out that this is probably the correct choice. I can teach it in the place of Thunderbolt because I only need Psychic against the champion, and then I can set up on the Gyarados and use Rest to heal my health. But if I don't have a Chesto Berry, then the Gyarados sees that it can knock me out with 2 hits from Hyper Beam and Mr. Mime faints. So I need a Chesto Berry plus Rest, and then I can set up against the Gyarados. After fumbling a little bit and having some losses because I forgot to teach Rest, I'm doing this after saving, by the way, so that I don't lock in the choice, because I wasn't sure that this was going to be the right choice, but in the end it really is. This way I can set up with Calm Mind, get to +3, then use Rest to heal, and from there I can sneak in 1 more Calm Mind because he chose Hyper Beam, and now I have +4. Of course, the sneaking in the last Calm Mind was a mistake. I should have set up with Substitute because now I don't have enough health to survive the Aerodactyl. That is Mr. Mime's 15th reset, and yes, I am definitely kind of falling apart here. It took me a lot longer than I wish it had to figure out the strategy that was correct here against Lance, but eventually I do settle on it. Set up with Calm Mind 3 times against the Gyarados, hopefully survive its attacks, which is not always going to happen depending on what it chooses. If it goes for 2 Dragon Rages, I just lose, but if it mixes in a bite, I will probably just barely survive. I can then use Rest, re-establish Substitute, and knock his lead out. From there I take no damage from the Aerodactyl, I can 2-shot the Dragonite and 1-shot the following 2 Dragonairs. Mr. Mime gets a Lance split of 1 hour 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Honestly, very disappointing in the context of this playthrough, but in the context of all my Fire Red runs, the second place Pokemon is Hypno with a time under 1 hour and 20 minutes. Mr. Mime is honestly just destroying this game. Even though I have 17 resets and the playthrough has been very sloppy. Okay, there's one trainer left, let's fight the champion. Up until this point, I haven't mentioned Whirlwind on the Pidgeot. I did not deposit my HM users to save time in the playthrough, so I can't set up past +2, otherwise he's gonna Whirlwind me out, and I'll lose my stat changes. That said, Psychic is still able to one-shot the Pidgeot, and it doesn't take care of the Gyarados, but I didn't think that this mattered, I can just two-shot. After that, Charizard comes in, Aerial Ace does a decent amount of damage, but not enough to knock me out. And then he chooses Alakazam, which is gonna be really bad against Mr. Mime. I re-establish Substitute, take my time setting up with Calm Mind, I use Rest to heal, and then I finish the Psychic type. From there, Rhydon goes down to a single hit, and so does the Executor. Mr. Mime clocks in with a final first playthrough time of 1 hour 4 minutes and 27 seconds, with 17 resets, 0 blackouts, at level 63 with a game time of 3 hours and 35 minutes. Okay, I have a problem here. So I recorded all of this voiceover and I was intending for this to be just a solo Mr. Mime video, but now I have realized that this needs to be a Mr. Mime versus Mewtwo video because I want to do second playthroughs with these two and see just how low I can get both of their times. I think because of its growth rate, Mr. Mime might actually have a chance of beating the legendary. The fact that Mewtwo is on the slow growth curve really does hold it back, but maybe my play developing over the last 6 or 7 months will still allow the legendary to come out with a faster time. But before that, I promise it's coming. Let's conclude the post game with Mr. Mime and see how it does. I was kind of worried for this because there are now dark types in the league, specifically the champion's Tyranitar, and my moveset is just not going to work against that thing. This might be the one and only case where Mr. Mime using Brick Break makes sense. So I head back to the Celadon department store and buy one of these TMs before continuing with the run. Also, I grab the leftovers, and I do explore the Lost Cave to pick up one additional rare candy, just because Mr. Mime is quite under-leveled, and I am worried about that for the league rematches. Right now in my playthroughs, I am always optimizing for the first league finish, not the second league finish. In the future, I do want to optimize for the second league finish, which will change where some Pokemon use rare candies. Like for Mr. Mime, maybe it does make sense to do a little bit more training and use its candies later into the run, so it can be a higher level for the eventual champion. But all of that's just theoretical. Let's get into this second league attempt and see how it goes. All of the Elite Four Pokemon are at higher levels now, and while I don't have Thunderbolt for Lorelei, it doesn't really matter. Substitute gives me time and defenses to set up Calm Mind, and then Psychic just does enough damage. Now, if you've watched a lot of Generation 1, this might come as a surprise to you, but Bruno in the league rematches is quite possibly the hardest trainer in Fire Red. For Mr. Mime, this is the case. Even though it's a Psychic type, and technically I'm super effective against his fighting types, the fact that he leads with Steelix means I don't have good damage. I'm going to have to set up, but it does a lot with its moves. Both Earthquake and Iron Tail are breaking my Substitute in a single hit, and it also tries Rock Tomb, which is dangerous because if it gets one speed drop, then Mr. Mime is slower than Hitmonlee. As long as I'm faster than the Steelix, it's going to try to use Rock Tomb some of the times to drop my speed, so this is something that is a little bit reliable. That said, 2 of the Rock type moves break my sub, meaning I can only get a single Calm Mind in every time I set up my defense. What this means is that I'm going to get taken to low health, and by the time I'm around about half, then the Steelix starts prioritizing Iron Tail or Earthquake because it knows it can get the one hit. It has no idea that I have a substitute, but it just starts breaking my defense every turn, and I can't set it up infinitely, and Mr. Mime faints. There are 2 straightforward solutions to this. Number 1, I can go out and train until I need like 2 Calm Minds to one-shot the Steelix, but that's going to take quite a while. I would predict around level 75 or 78 for Mr. Mime to pull it off. The other solution is just luck through the Steelix with it missing a Rock Tomb. If this happens, I will get 1 or 2 more Calm Minds in and then potentially be able to one-hit the rest of Bruno's team members. I was really curious about Mr. Mime's abilities against the other Elite Four members at a low level, so I wanted to luck through this with the Rock Tomb miss. While we watch me lose a bunch, I'll bring up the move pool on the right-hand side of the screen and talk through some other more niche options. Of course, if you don't ban Double Team, it could be useful here. After all, Iron Tail has terrible accuracy accuracy. Another funny play is trying to combo Sunny Day with Solar Beam, but since the Steel type resists grass type moves, it would only do neutral damage, and Steelix does have low special defense, but I think it would still survive one hit. This probably means you need one Calm Mind plus Sunny Day and then Solar Beam, which is roughly an equivalent number of turns, and you lose 2 move slots, which I just didn't think was worth it. Of course, if you allow pickup, then you can get Meowth on your party and grab a bunch of hidden power TMs, set this move to say Water type, and then you have super effective damage against the Steelix, which would definitely solve it. Just so everyone's aware, Brick Break is definitely not the answer, but another fighting type move, Counter, might be. You could potentially bring this in and counter an Earthquake, dealing massive damage to the Steelix, but in this case you're going to be hit by Rock Tomb first, and then you'll be slower than the other Pokemon and likely faint. There are some other strategies like using the move reminder to teach a barrier, setting up your defenses, then setting up with Calm Mind, using say Rest to heal your health, and then Psychic to get the knockout. Honestly, I probably should have played things this way, but I don't have Rest available to me, so that's not an option in this run. I could also pair up 2 of the weirdest Pokemon by using Attract with Miss Mime so that the Steelix falls in love with it. Like, that one's really weird, but it could potentially work. After all, Attract does prevent the opponent's move 50% of the time. In this case, I have a total of 5 resets, then I get lucky with a Rock Tomb miss. Because of it and the fact that I do tank 1 Rock Tomb, I get all the way to +4 and then Psychic one-shots the Steelix. It also takes down the higher level Steelix, which Bruno sends in next, and from there I have to survive the Hitmonlee's attack. Well, I would have, but it just misses Mega Kick, and as a result, Mr. Mime is able to finish off Bruno. Although, I don't feel very good about this win. Before Agatha, I used 2 rare candies. These are the last ones I have available to me. I probably should have used these before Bruno, but I didn't want to lose out on experience. The Ghost type specialist is not very difficult because the lead Gengar loves to use Confuse Ray and Hypnosis. This means Substitute is very potent, blocking her status moves, and I can set up with Calm Mind. As a result of this, Psychic just sweeps and I move on to Lance, who is much easier this time around. Because Mr. Mime is faster than the Gyarados, after I set up Substitute, it is just going to spam Thunder Wave over and over again, giving me full setup with Calm Mind for free. Now, the Aerodactyl is faster than Mr. Mime, but I still have my Substitute in place by the time I make it there, so it doesn't even matter, and with that, I am moving on to the champion. Okay, so the beginning of this fight is fairly straightforward. Megahorn is always going to break my Substitute, so unless it misses, I am not going to have my defenses set up. In this case, I tried for the miss, but I don't get it, so eventually I just use Psychic to try and knock the Heracross out, and it doesn't do enough damage. Okay, remember back to the Bruno fight where I said I could go and level up? Yeah, that would have helped here, because I would have more damage against the Heracross, allowing me to one-shot. Now in this case, I need to have one turn where Megahorn misses so that I can set up Calm Mind, and then use Psychic to knock it out in a single hit. I get a total of 4 losses trying this strategy after the initial loss, so that is 5 now on the champion, and then finally the Heracross does miss. Also, note there that I was using Psychic instead of Calm Mind. I was hoping for critical hits, figuring if I'm attacking, maybe the odds are a little bit more in my favor. He can miss and I can crit. However, then once I make it to the Alakazam, things are still bad, because this Psychic type knows Shadow Ball, so it can break my Substitute in a single turn. As a result, I'm not really able to set up with Calm Mind safely unless the Alakazam also goes for setup, which sometimes it does, so maybe there's a path to victory here for Mr. Mime. However, not in this case. It breaks my Substitute, and Psychic is not doing nearly enough damage, so that's another reset. In a miraculous turn of events, I make it past the Heracross in the next battle. Here against the Alakazam, I was kind of wishing that I had Return, but that would make the Tyranitar much more difficult, so Brick Break is required. Eventually, I do knock the Psychic type out, but I don't have my defense in place, and I only have +1. So how much will Brick Break do to the defensive Rock Dark type? With 4 times damage, the answer is about half. Alright, I do survive the Earthquake, which is really convenient, and move on to the champion's final 3 Pokemon. The first of them is Exeggutor. I figured here that I could set up with Substitute and block its Sleep Powder, then set up with Calm Mind while surviving due to my leftovers. However, that's not how the turn works. You take Sandstorm damage before you recover health. As a result, the chip damage knocks Mr. Mime out. Okay, so there are a lot of resets now. They come in fast succession, all against the Heracross, until I finally defeat it and move on to the Alakazam again. again. This time, I get set up to +4, move on to the Tyranitar again, and you know how Mr. Mime does it? I just get a critical hit, knocking it out in a single turn. With that luck, I can set up my substitute, finish my setup if I want to. I don't, I only go to +5, and from there I'm able to knock out the Gyarados as well as the final Charizard. Mr. Mime finishes the post-game in 30 minutes 34 seconds with 17 resets, 0 blackouts at level 74 with a cumulative game time of 5 hours and 4 minutes. Honestly, this could have gone a lot worse. I could have been stuck at Bruno and the champion for a significantly longer period of time. If I don't level up more, I'm gonna need an alternative strategy to defeat both of them. At long last, it is time for Mewtwo to make an entrance and see how it can do against Mr. Mime. Just a few quick reminders with Mewtwo. I did a previous playthrough which was only a single attempt until the first champion, so I have not done the league rematches with this thing. Also, since it has a slow growth rate, I expect that it's not going to be able to level up much to get better damage ranges. However, like Mr. Mime, it does have access to Calm Mind to set up. Also, its stats are just busted: 106 HP, 110 attack, 90 defense, 130 speed, 154 special attack, and 90 special defense. For this playthrough, I went with a quiet Mewtwo to raise its special attack and lower its speed. After all, Mr. Mime was outspeeding pretty much everything except Aerodactyl, and since Mewtwo's base speed is higher, I just assume that it should be fine against everything. Maybe the Aerodactyl will move first, but I don't think that'll end up mattering. In terms of move pool, Mewtwo is so stacked. It gets everything. In addition to Psychic and Thunderbolt, which Mr. Mime has, it also gets access to coverage like Ice Beam, Flamethrower, and Aerial Ace. I'm considering this my second playthrough with Mewtwo, so I'm going to try to build on the knowledge that I gained throughout my first playthrough to make this attempt a little bit faster. Also, for all of the follow-up runs in this video, I'm going to be facing the Squirtle team to see how Psychic types do against it. Okay, so in the early game with Mewtwo, I fight minimum battles until the end of Viridian Forest. Then inside of Brock's gym, I do battle the Camper just for a little bit more experience. I figured I might as well do this. He's pretty fast and along the main path. Brock is of course very easy because I have Confusion at the beginning of the game. Lacking Barrier and Substitute does make this a little bit more sketchy. Maybe if Brock got a lot of critical hits, Mewtwo could faint, but in most cases, Mewtwo is just going to sweep through his team with ease. Immediately I teach it Rock Tomb. This move is actually really important in the earliest portions of the game for Mewtwo because coming up very soon is one of the hardest battles in the playthrough. That is against Rival 2 in Cerulean City. In my first run, this is where I got my first reset because the Pidgeotto lowered my accuracy with Sand Attack, and that is exactly what happens at the beginning of this battle. Note, because of the slow growth rate, my Mewtwo is only level 13 at this point in the game because I have really been cutting as much training as I thought was possible. Rock Tomb does the best damage to the Pidgeotto, and it's just barely not able to 2-hit. Unlike with Mr. Mime where I can block Sand Attack with Substitute, Mewtwo can't do this, so Barrier is also useless here until I make it to the Rattata. And by that point, I just want to be attacking. In the end, Mewtwo pulls through, just barely, with only 8 hit points remaining. From here, things get a lot easier. Route 24 and 25 have a lot of experience leveling Mewtwo up to 19, and then after I defeat the Rocket outside of Cerulean City, it is almost level 20. I take on Misty next. Confusion is able to one-hit the Staryu, and then against Starmie, I can use Mega Punch, and it 3 hits, which is okay. I guess the Starmie does use Recover a bunch, which is annoying, but in the end it doesn't matter, and I still am able to pull through. Winning this fight gives me access to the Water Pulse TM, which yes, Mewtwo can learn, so I'm going to teach it now so I have access to another special move. The rival in the SSN seems like he would be more difficult because the Wartortle now knows Bite, which is super effective, but I don't really know what to say. The Blastoise team is not very good. Every time I've faced it in one of these Fire Red videos, I am just left kind of bewildered as to what the developers were intending. It is so rarely the case that this thing is threatening, and the exact same thing can be said for Surge. Defeating him gives me the TM for Shockwave, which I'm going to teach in the place of Rock Tomb. From here I have access to the mid-game. Now I want to mention a little optimization that I make in Celadon City, which applies to all Psychic types that are running this game. Actually, it applies to all Pokemon that can learn the TM for Psychic. Upon arriving in the city, I go to the apartment buildings and grab the T from the old lady. Then I pick up the HM for Fly, and I can use this to return to Celadon. Now that I have it, I can journey to Saffron City, pick up the TM for Psychic, and teach this to my solo Mon. For Mewtwo, I put it in the place of Mega Punch so that I have access to a little bit more PP with Confusion, preventing me from needing heals. With Fly, I can quickly head back to Celadon City, crush the hideout. None of the trainers in here are good against Mewtwo. And with that, I can continue being efficient with my pathing, digging out of the game corner, picking up the coin case, and then defeating Erica. Okay, time for the rival in Pokemon Tower, and once again the Wartortle team is underwhelming. Also, Mewtwo is just powerful enough to one-shot all of these Pokemon. On Cycling Road, I'll just re-emphasize the fact that I am skipping all of the trainers to give Mewtwo the fastest possible time. Then in Fuchsia City, I teach its Substitute in the place of Confusion, and speed my way through the Safari Zone, and then into Koga's gym. Things get a little bit scary here against Juggler Kirk. Mewtwo doesn't have great options for him. Once again, Psychic is the best choice, and he poisons me. I should be using Substitute there to block his status moves, and I did not learn that lesson during this playthrough because Mewtwo is good enough to pull through. It is also able to stomp Koga, although the fact that I am underleveled means that I do not one-hit the muck. Yeah, that's the only setback here, it just takes a little bit more time. In Sylph, I've had an optional battle, grabbing myself an extra rare candy in the process, and then I get caught by this guy who's walking back and forth, wasting a little bit more time. After that, because I'm fairly close to leveling up, I fight some additional trainers. I also grab extra items, which I'm going to sell later on to get access to Thunderbolt, and then at level 37, I use 8 rare candies to boost Mewtwo to level 45 before taking on the rival. I didn't feel that with a legendary I needed to backtrack to this location, I just want to come here once. After establishing Substitute, I go on a spree with Psychic. The Blastoise does survive and use Bite, breaking my sub, which means Growlithe is hilariously able to intimidate Mewtwo, but I'm not using physical attacks, so it's irrelevant. With his team finished, I go up against Sabrina, and this is really where you can see just how much better Mewtwo is when compared with Mr. Mime. Her Alakazam is taking more than half from each of my Psychics, and even after it sets up a Calm Mind, it still goes down to 2 hits. So now Mewtwo has access to the setup move, and I am also going to go to the department store and sell all the items I've collected to this point in the playthrough so that I have enough coins to purchase Thunderbolt. I teach Calm Mind in the place of Shockwave, keeping Water Pulse for Giovanni and Blaine, but again, it's not really helpful here. Blaine is not really good enough to even break my Substitute with his Growlithe, and +2 is all I need to one-hit all of his Pokemon. Giovanni is just terrible, and Mewtwo crushes the final rival after setting up to +3. For Lorelei, I've taught Thunderbolt in the place of Water Pulse, Substitute and Calm Mind give Mewtwo the setup it needs, and her team is an easy sweep. Bruno doesn't require setup, and I did decide to set up against Agatha, but I only went to +2. Even this might be overkill. After that, I move on to Lance. It was at this point in the challenge that I thought Mewtwo was going to get a 0 reset playthrough. However, the Gyarados is able to break my Substitutes using Dragon Rage twice. It's a little bit annoying. I get set up to +2, continue using Substitute, and then use Thunderbolt to knock out the Gyarados. Aerodactyl's next. It's faster, breaking my sub before I finish it off. Okay, so moving on to the Dragonite, I figured that Psychic would be enough, but no, with only +2, Mewtwo is not able to knock out the Dragon. It survives on red health, uses Hyper Beam, and that is my first reset. I was keeping some rare candies in my bag, figuring that maybe Mewtwo wouldn't even need them. I level up with them to 56, giving me more damage now when I'm on +2. Also, if the Gyarados goes a little bit better, I can get set up to +3, and with this, I can take out the Dragonite in a single shot and move on to the champion. If I'm able to do this without another reset, Mewtwo's going to get a time under 50 minutes. The Pidgeot has Whirlwind, so I set up to +2, and then I start my sweep. Arcanine hits with extreme speed, Psychic one-shots it, Thunderbolt takes care of the Blastoise, Alakazam survives using Psychic. It does not have Shadow Ball in this fight, so even though he tries to heal it, I'm able to finish it off. I should have been using Thunderbolt, by the way. I was just making a silly mistake. Rhydon has no special defense, and that leaves only Executor, but I have enough health to set up Substitute, preventing it from using things like Sleep Powder just in case I don't one-hit. And I don't, so I'm grateful I set up. It didn't go for Sleep Powder, but that could have messed me up because Egg Bomb would have done decent damage. In this case, Mewtwo just knocks out the champion's final Pokemon and clocks in with its final result. 48 minutes and 30 seconds, with 1 reset, no blackouts at level 58 with a game time of 3 hours and 5 minutes. Okay, so obviously the legendary is gonna be better than Mr. Mime, but I still think that the other Psychic type has a chance of putting out a really good result in its second run. Maybe it will get under Mewtwo's first playthrough time. That said, Mr. Mime really fell apart once it reached Lance and needed to give up on Thunderbolt. Then it didn't have a special move it could boost and hit Tyranitar with in the final champion fight, but Mewtwo doesn't have that problem. So I have nothing to say about Mewtwo's attempts against Lorelei, Agatha, and Lance, because it's just a better version of Mr. Mime with a better moveset. I do want to go over Bruno though, because Mewtwo has something that sets it apart here, which is its higher defense stat. This means Substitute can survive multiple hits from Rock Tomb, allowing it to set up more quickly with Calm Mind. Also, my special attack is just much higher, so I won't need to get to +4. With only +3, I'm able to one-shot both of the Steelix and then finish off Bruno's fighting types. Okay, so we've made it to the champion, and I actually had a question here, which is, will Mewtwo survive a Mega Horn? I wanted to experiment with that, trying a single Calm Mind, letting the Heracross attack me, and the answer is no, Mewtwo does not survive a single Mega Horn. Instead, I just need to one-shot with Psychic on the first turn. Then Alakazam comes in, I just set up Calm Mind once, and then two-shot with Thunderbolt. The Alakazam doesn't actually do any damage with Shadow Ball, instead just prioritizing its own setup. Alright, Tyranitar is next. I have Thunderbolt for it. I can easily shrug off an Earthquake and take it down with only 2 hits. From there, things actually get a little bit scary. The Arcanine survives a single hit because Mewtwo is under-leveled by 7 in this case, which is usually not what happens in a solo challenge. This demonstrates 2 things: how much training I was able to squeeze out of the run, and the impact of using rare candies early on into the playthrough. Mewtwo survives on orange health. I should have set up Calm Mind one more time because the champion is stuck using full restores, but I didn't. In the end, the Arcanine goes down and I move on. From here, I can re-establish Substitute against the Executor, just barely having enough health. After Sandstorm damage, I have 2 hit points left over. I can heal every turn with the leftovers, and as a result, I set up to +3, knock out the Grass type, move on to Blastoise, and it doesn't have super effective damage anymore, so Mewtwo pulls through. It gets the best post-league time that I have to this point, 17 minutes and 4 seconds, with 1 reset at level 67, with a cumulative game time of 4 hours and 11 minutes. This run has raised my bar for what is possible in Fire Red. Now, excellent times should be considered under 50 minutes, with good times being under the hour mark. So the question remains, how close can Mr. Mime get to Mewtwo in its second attempt? In the early game, I need to do preparations, though I'm not arriving at the rival in Cerulean City and just relying on luck. Because Mr. Mime is very good with confusion in the early game, and most of the bug Pokemon are poison types in the forest, I fight 3 optional bug catchers: the first guy, the next guy who has 3 Pokemon, and then the person facing the wall who has 2 Metapod. After defeating the mandatory bug catcher, my Mr. Mime is almost level 10, and I battle the camper, bringing it up to level 11 before Brock. Of course, as I proved before, this is not needed, but I wanted the experience. To continue training on Route 3, I fight this optional bug catcher as well as the Lass, and then the mandatory bug catcher as well as the Jigglypuff Lass. In Mount Moon, I can continue my training fighting the Super Nerd, bug catcher, Lass, Rocket, and Youngster. I'm doing this so that I can be over the next damage rounding threshold at level 18 by the time I arrive in Cerulean City. Defeating the Super Nerd gives me the experience to have this level, and then I am ready to face the rival. This is all much easier now. There are no problems for Mr. Mime. I know the strategy. I can get set up fully, then teach Light Screen in the place of Meditate after defeating the Pidgeotto, and that brings me to the secondary benefit of this early leveling. Once I'm on Route 25, I level up to 22 earlier than I did in the previous playthrough, meaning that I can learn Magical Leaf in the place of Barrier before Misty, and this does make her much easier. On the SSN, I have to remember to pick up Rest before defeating the rival, and then for Surge, I just want to mention a kind of Mime strategy that I went for. I taught Encore in the place of Light Screen, just so when Raichu uses Thunder Wave, I can trap it using this move and finish it for free. Yes, it is possible to make Surge worse than he already is. Okay, so the mid-game moveset is unchanged from the last playthrough: Confusion, Magical Leaf, Shockwave, and Substitute. Psybeam replaces Confusion a little bit earlier this time because of the early training, meaning that some of the trainers at the end of the cave feel a little bit easier. In Celadon City, I do the same sequence that I did with Mewtwo, resulting in Mr. Mime heading south on Cycling Road after beating Erica and the rival in Pokemon Tower. Here I am going to do some optional training against Biker William. Then, despite how bad Koga was last time, I decided to go into his gym right away with Mr. Mime, and it's here that I make a mistake. Remember when Mewtwo got poisoned by Juggler Kirk, and it was kind of close, but not really that bad because I was using a legendary? Yeah, for Mr. Mime, getting poisoned is not acceptable. The Drowsy take 3 shots to knock out with Psychic at this level, so I don't have enough time to recover the status condition, and I didn't have the foresight to equip a Pecha Berry because I just didn't expect this fight to be that difficult. With Mr. Mime, I'm going to take a Blackout here as a result, which does set it back a little bit. That said, the obvious choice choice here is just use Substitute, then Poison Gas can't do anything, and Mr. Mime takes an easy victory. Koga shouldn't be bad with Mr. Mime. I think I got very unlucky last time. In this case, I just one-hit the coughing, and the Mux minimizes don't mess me up. In Sylph, I train to level 42, and then I use 8 rare candies like with Mewtwo, but it's going to a higher level this time, all the way to 50 before the rival. This makes up for the stat differential between the two, and I am able to pull through the battle against him fairly easily actually. The fact that Blastoise is coming in first and it doesn't have good physical attacks really does help the Psychic type out. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a small difference here that I make between the two playthroughs. I go back to Celadon City and sell stuff now, because I can purchase Thunderbolt before I go into Sabrina's gym. I'm bringing this up because you might want Thunderbolt to take on Sabrina's Alakazam with, but for me, I definitely don't want to teach it. My whole plan with Mr. Mime is centering around the fact that I'm going to hold on to Shockwave on my moveset for as long as possible. An alternative here would be teaching Thunderbolt in the place of Magical Leaf, but that still won't work out because later in the game, I need to have only Psychic as a damage dealing move. So I would need to give up Thunderbolt, and I will not earn enough money to get it back. What this means is Mr. Mime needs to make it by Sabrina's Alakazam with some degree of luck. Dropping special defense with Psychic is one way to do it, and in this run, I get the luck I need the first attempt I have against her. With her defeated, I teach Calm Mind in the place of Magical Leaf, keeping Shockwave for my electric move in the league. I'm not falling victim to the trap of keeping Magical Leaf for Giovanni, it's just not needed. Psychic is able to steamroll Blaine after setup. Mr. Mime only needs +3 for this fight, and then for Giovanni, I only need +2 to make it through all of his Pokemon. The rival on Route 22 is not difficult, only +2 is needed here as well. I thought that it was going to be a higher number, but it isn't, so yeah, he's not actually that good. In Victory Road, I have pristine pathing, as much as you can on 4x speed, and I don't battle an extra trainer. Lorelei is straightforward because I can set up so much and then sweep with Psychic. Bruno is just simple. Agatha also gives me time to set up, and then I move into Lance's chamber. Before this fight, I teach Rest in the place of Shockwave, giving up my electric move, but I still have Thunderbolt for the champion's Tyranitar during the league rematches. I will admit that this strategy with Mr. Mime is not flawless. It can lose to Gyarados. The fact that I have one Chesto Berry means that I cannot use Rest more than once in this fight. If that happens, the Gyarados is just going to do too much damage and knock Mr. Mime out. So if it goes for Dragon Rage over and over again, not using Bite, then things can get pretty sketchy. Also, there's another flaw. If I take out the Gyarados, have Substitute in place, it blocks Aerodactyl's attack and I knock it out in one hit, then with +3, I have a damage range on his Dragonite. This is the only other Pokemon in the battle that can survive, and of course in this case it does, knocking Mr. Mime out. I had a fast reset in the next battle, but in third one I finally make it to the Dragonite, get the damage range I need, and with that Lance is defeated. Just a little bit bumpy, but much better than in my first playthrough. The champion is last, and I have nothing to say for this fight. It is so simple. By the way, you can set up to +3 against the Pidgeot because it's slower than Mr. Mime. Once that happens, you just need to attack so that it doesn't whirlwind you out. I could deposit my HM users, but that'll slow down the league rematches because I'll have to go to Viridian City to pick them up, so I didn't make that choice. Either way, it doesn't really matter because I have Rest, so I can take my time against the Alakazam, set up more if I really want to, and then just one-shot everything else. Well, except the Executor, which gets healed a ridiculous number of times. I should have just set up 2 more times with Calm Mind and one-shot this thing. Anyways, Mr. Mime clocks in with a second playthrough time of 55 minutes and 6 seconds with 2 resets at level 62. This is a game time of 3 hours and 28 minutes. This is faster than Mewtwo's first attempt, so Mr. Mime did have it in it. I just wasn't up to the task in my first run. Also, I do want to note that Mr. Mime's game time tied Mewtwo's first game time exactly. What this suggests to me is that while Mr. Mime is a very good Psychic type and currently the second best Pokemon that I have run in Fire Red, it is just not on the legendaries level. Thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon or through YouTube memberships, it really does mean the world to me. Now, let's place Mr. Mime in the tier list. Remember, this is for its first playthrough, so its original time of 1 hour and 4 minutes earns itself the top spot in the A tier, ahead of Hypno by a significant margin. That said, in some ways these Pokemon are comparable, and in other ways they aren't. So for example, Hypno started as a Drowsy in its playthrough, meaning it had a slower early game than it otherwise would have. Maybe you think this is a more fair comparison because Mr. Mime is a single stage Pokemon, so they should be compared this way, but I'm left wondering what would happen if Hypno started fully evolved. After all, it is my goal to beat these main series Pokemon games with every single species, and that means beating the whole game with just Drowsy and beating the whole game with just Hypno. But I don't have time for another run in this video. After all, this is already already one of my most unfocused pieces of content. If I added a whole other playthrough, then the YouTube timecode would bloat to what you're looking at right now. And so yeah, of course I added a Hypno run. Let's see what happens when it starts fully evolved. It's very different than the other two, which are both centralized around special attack. In this case, Hypno has 73 in both of its offensive stats. It has fantastic special defense with 115, but everything else is just kind of okay. 85 HP is quite good, 70 defense is fine, I guess, and 67 speed is not really good. This would be more than enough to move first against almost everything in Emerald, but in Fire Red, the AI-controlled Pokemon are much faster. Its move pool is also much different. It starts with Pound, Hypnosis, Disable, and Confusion. Hypnosis is much worse in Generation 3 when compared to how it does in Generation 1. Pound is nice, a normal type move is always good. Confusion helps solve Brock, and then through level up, it does get some other useful stuff like Headbutt at level 17 and Meditate at level 29. During my first run with Drowsy and Hypno, I think I put a little bit too much stock in Meditate though, so for this playthrough I'm going to run without Meditate all the way up until Calm Mind and then switch over to the special strategy. And that's where things really start falling apart for Hypno, because if you look at its TM and HM learn set, it just doesn't get any good special moves outside of Psychic. The only other option that I have available to me is Thief, which is a base 40 power dark type move. That is not going to perform particularly well against the champion's Tyranitar in the league rematches. Also, since Hypno is comparable to Mr. Mime, I should draw attention to its ability, which is Insomnia. It will not be able to solve Lance with Rest. I didn't clue into this early on in the run, so I am going to pick up Rest eventually and then try to use it, which I am telling you about in advance because it is one of the most cringe-inducing things to watch. Before we get there though, let's go through the early game. Brock is pretty simple with Confusion. I did do extra training in Viridian Forest. Now on my second Mr. Mime playthrough I used a Modest Nature, but with Hypno I'm using a Hardy Nature. I think I probably should have gone for a Modest Nature here in retrospect, but I wasn't sure about Hypno since I didn't have experience playing it and it wasn't as obvious as Mewtwo. Plus I figured that with Calm Mind it would have enough overkill that getting a few more special attack points wouldn't really make a big difference. Inside Mount Moon I pick up Thief, my only other special move. This is so frustrating. Then I learn Headbutt in the place of Pound and I'm ready to head into Cerulean City. The fight against the rival apparently is one of the hardest battles for these psychic types. It is so sketchy. The Rattata does a lot of damage with Quick Attack and I have to rely on Hypnosis to defeat his Squirtle without taking damage because Headbutt has to 3-hit. Misty is a little bit weird with Hypno. Because I didn't use a Modest Nature and I have Brock's Badge Boost, my attack stat is higher when compared with my special stat. Thief's effective power is higher and Starmie has more defense than special defense, but I went with Headbutt to knock it out. I don't know if this was the right choice. I think either way it would have been a 3-shot, not really mattering. Okay, Surge. Then, once reaching Lavender Town, I pick up the TM for Return, which is more useful with Hypno when compared to the other two psychic types. After getting the most powerful stab move, doing some mid-game stuff, I arrive at Koga, who is quite simple for Hypno. Now, if my nature was mistake number 1, and my misuse of Rest was mistake number 2, this is my third mistake. I should have done more additional training with Hypno in Sylph. I figured that it was going to play so similarly to Mr. Mime that I could use my 8 rare candies here and still be able to squeeze through the league using Calm Mind. That is not how things are going to play out. Also, I forgot to use my rare candies once. I was pretty tired by this point. This is my 4th Fire Red playthrough of a single day. Yes, I did all of these playthroughs in one day because curiosity was leading me. After using the rare candies, the rival is not very difficult. His Blastoise takes 3 hits from Hypno, which is a little bit annoying. It hits once with Bite, doing some damage, and then the Growlithe lowers my attack with Intimidate. Of the 3 Pokemon, this is the only one that cares about this ability, but even then I crit the Execute with Headbutt, and I still have Thief for the Alakazam. So Mewtwo didn't have problems against Sabrina because it has high enough special attack. Mr. Mime did because it only has special moves and has to rely on them for her Alakazam, but Hypno's physical attack allows it to get an easy victory here using Headbutt. Also, do note that my Hypno has 107 speed right before I knock out her Mr. Mime. Then I level up and I get 111, meaning I move first against the Alakazam, which has 108. I didn't plan this, but honestly it all worked out perfectly. Headbutt is physical, it does massive damage to the Alakazam, and the fact that I'm faster means I can flinch, which is what happens, so it can't use Recover, and I knock it out in 2 turns. Of course, Hypno gets Calm Mind in the place of Headbutt, and now its set is exclusively special. Blaine, Giovanni, and Rival 6 aren't issues, and then I arrive at Lorelei. So, the previous Pokemon, once they got fully set up, they could just sweep her team, and I thought that Hypno would be similar, but it isn't. With only +3, Hypno cannot one-shot the Lapras, and so it paralyzes me with Body Slam, and that leads to a reset. The solution here is not trying to go too fast, just set up to +6, one-shot everything, and win. Bruno is simple, Agatha is also straightforward, and then I move on to Lance. This is where I make my major mistake. Against the Gyarados, even though Hypno has higher HP, it still loses its substitutes after 2 hits. Because of this, I'm not able to set up Calm Mind very quickly, and because of my lower special attack stat, I am not able to one-shot the Gyarados, meaning Lance uses a full restore, healing. This delays the fight even longer, and when I make it to the Aerodactyl, I don't have enough health to survive. Okay, get ready to cringe, because I teach Rest in the place of Thief, go into the battle, try to use it, and realize that my favorite strategy is just not going to work with Hypno because of its awful ability. Yes, I think Insomnia is more bad than good in solo runs. Access to recovery really helps out in a pinch, and in this case, my ability is just useless. It works against me. Also in Fire Red, there are so few opponents that use sleep-inducing moves that in most cases, you're not actually blocking key strategies from the enemy. Okay, I mentioned Return before. I'm going to teach it to Hypno now in the place of Rest, just so I have a move that at least does something during battle. So how do I get through Lance? Well, the answer is actually don't use Substitute. If I just set up with Calm Mind, the Gyarados attacks me a bunch, I can hold a Citrus Berry, recover some health, the Gyarados keeps seeing low damage ranges, and I'm able to get to +4 and one-shot. From there, Aerodactyl hits, but it doesn't do very much because my defenses and HP are higher. I finish it in a single hit, I outspeed the Dragonite one-shotting, and the Dragonair are easy to clean up. Okay, so Hypno's speed stat has not yet been a liability for it, but we're starting to get into the place where it is going to become a problem. The champion's Pidgeot has 130 speed, but Hypno has 136. That means I can set up to +3, use Psychic, and knock it out. From there, the rest of the fight is very easy, and I clock in with my first result using Hypno as a single species. Its time is 55 minutes and 47 seconds, with 4 resets at level 65 with a game time of 3 hours and 24 minutes. Interestingly, Hypno beats both Mewtwo and Mr. Mime for game time, but it loses to them when considering real time. And in the case of Mr. Mime's second playthrough, only 41 seconds separate these two. I think this is a fairly fair comparison to make because I played Hypno last of all of these Pokemon, so there was the most experience available for it. Plus, I had done it previously, although I did evolve in the early game. Of the 3 playthroughs, this is probably the sloppiest. That should be obvious to all of you. But what shouldn't be obvious to all of you is which stat I should be boosting with my nature. I'm sure just like me, you were looking at a bunch of the damage ranges going like, you should have more special attack, that would be really great. No. Hypno needs more speed. Coming back to the league to do the rematches, I have no problems against Lorelei or Bruno. In this case, my higher defense and more HP really does help here against the Steelix. That said, by the time I make it to Agatha, Hypno is just not fast enough. The first Gengar has 170 speed, the Crobat has 177, the Misdreavus and the Arbok are both slower than me, but the final Gengar has 180 speed. If I increase my speed by 10% with my nature, I would be speed tied with the first Gengar, but still slower than the Crobat and the final Gengar. And this is a serious problem. The first Gengar does not want to use its status moves like it normally does when you set up with Substitute. Instead, it's just spamming Shadow Ball because it sees that it has great damage. Even if I knock it out right away using Psychic, which is a possibility, then the Crobat comes in and it also knows Shadow Ball, which can do massive damage. This leaves Hypno on red health by the time the final Gengar comes in, and of course it's faster, there's no Gen 1 miss, so I'm always going to lose if it's this scenario. I kept trying, losing over and over again to the initial Pokemon, hoping that maybe once the Gengar will use Hypnosis or Confuse Ray, but it doesn't seem like that's gonna happen. One possibility for me to win is that the Crobat chooses Air Cutter, I heal with leftovers, and I'm able to survive the final Gengar's hit with Shadow Ball, knocking it out with a single Psychic. But the more I played this fight, the more that felt less likely. Now, you're probably wondering, why not just black out and train up more? That seems like the most logical option. Well, yes, I think that is the better choice, but this is my first league attempt with Hypno, so I wanted to see how it would do if I was able to make it to the Misdreavus. And I actually do. I survived the Gengar's hit on 8 hit points, and then with Psychic, with +1 from Calm Mind, I am able to one-shot. But Misdreavus is next, and my Psychic is not able to knock it out. So I'm gonna lose here no matter what happens means I need to black out. Making it back to Agatha at level 73, this is still not enough. It doesn't really improve anything in a meaningful way. I take another blackout, come back into the league, train up to 75, fight Agatha again, and yeah, I get crushed. This is going so badly for Hypno. Here's the thing though, it appears at level 75 that Gengar's damage range is just slightly too low that sometimes it is now using Confuse Ray. There are several ways to play around this. Number one, I could go for Substitute, hoping that it'll just fizzle with the status move and then attack. But this isn't overall the best play because to avoid damage, it would have to use Confuse Ray 2 times in a row, and this is very unlikely. The second play is use Calm Mind so that I'm set up to do more damage for the rest of the fight, but I also didn't think that this was best. In the end, I think the strategy here is just spam Psychic, hope that Confusion doesn't cause you to hit yourself. If Hypno does, it's just a reset. Eventually, Agatha plays nice, Gengar goes down to Psychic, and I move on. Crobat's next, Psychic knocks it out after taking about a third from Shadow Ball. Then I can survive the final Gengar's Shadow Ball with orange health, move on to the Mischievous, and I debated briefly going for Substitute, but no, that's the wrong choice. Instead, just attack twice with Psychic, outspeed the Arbok, and get the one hit. Okay, so Lance is straightforward because of the Thunder Wave interaction with Substitute. While we watch that footage, I want to talk about the interesting combination of Hypno and Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is much more capable if you consider second league attempt. It is going to by far outperform Hypno getting there. However, if we're only considering the first league attempt, then Hypno will get a better time if we average the results over like 10 or 15 playthroughs. Mr. Mime relies on more luck against Lance, and the just setting up strategy seemed to perform pretty well with Hypno once I figured it out. With how difficult Agatha is due to her speed stats and with how low Hypno's speed stat is, it's going to take a little bit more training in the mid game, which will overall slow down its results if it's shooting for the second league. If it isn't, then it can cut the training and perform better. That said, things get really awful when we consider the champion. The Heracross will not go down to a single Psychic, so it either needs to miss a Megahorn because yes, Megahorn one hits Hypno even though I have higher defenses, or it strangely needs to go for counter, which yes is an option. I didn't think it was, and I have no idea why the AI is choosing this move. Still, once his lead goes down, then I move on to the Alakazam, and yeah, things are just bad here again. Just like with Mr. Mime, I don't really have a solution for Shadow Ball, so I'm just waiting for the AI to use Calm Mind enough times, allowing me to get set up. Sometimes Hypno goes down to the Alakazam, sometimes it gets hit by the Heracross using Rock Tomb, which I also didn't think was possible. This lowers my speed, and now I do not move first against the Tyranitar, meaning it attacks twice, knocking Hypno out. In order to win at this level, I need to not be hit by Megahorn, to not be hit by Rock Tomb, then for the Alakazam to not use Shadow Ball very much, and against the Tyranitar, then I can outspeed and 2-hit with Brick Break. Needless to say, this took so long and I had so many resets attempting it. I probably should have blacked out, but I didn't want to go back and try Agatha again. Leveling up to get more than 180 speed just wouldn't be worth it, and when I do this run again, I'm definitely going to boost my speed stat. Finally, at long last, Hypno knocks out the Tyranitar with 2 hits, moves on to the Arcanine, and from here things get easier. I can use Substitute, just barely surviving Sandstorm damage on the Executor, and then polish off the Blastoise, leading to Hypno's second league time of 43 minutes and 13 seconds, 35 resets, and 3 blackouts at level 77, with a game time of 5 hours and 13 minutes. Now I don't yet have good post-game data, so we're going to have to go with some kind of mucky numbers here, and a little bit of subjective ranking. Beedrill was by far the worst Pokemon during the league rematches, Golbat was also quite bad, and Hypno was better than both of them. But outside of them, every other Pokemon I've done the post-game with has just felt so much better. Okay, so let's reflect on these 3 Psychic types, Mewtwo, Mr. Mime, and Hypno, and I think that's the ordering. Mewtwo is obviously the best, Mr. Mime is surprisingly good, it's a little bit worse finishing the league the first time, but it definitely outperforms Hypno finishing the league the second time. And that brings me to my final point of the video, which is Hypno has fallen quite far. In Generation 1, this thing was an absolute monster, having its special defense stat as its special stat. Once this was split in Generation 2, it became defensive, and while I have used it as a special defender in a Nuzlocke in the past, it's just not very good in the solo format anymore. Although for now, its first attempt is still the 3rd spot overall. So Psychic types remain supreme in Kanto, at least right now. Now, if you've made it this far, you're incredible. Thank you so much. I will see you in my next video.